welcome back to Beauty Bee and to the second episode, I guess this is a series now, of Close Enough. This is sort of a duping the vibes of higher priced palettes using lower priced options. We're not talking about dupe palettes here, we're just talking about similar enough color schemes that could probably give you pretty similar looks to what the higher end palette could. So today's victim is the ABH Norvina line. These are really quite large palettes. These are 25 shades and they're expensive at about $60 a pop. There are up to 5 palettes now, so we'll be covering all 5 of them today, and let's just get into it. We're just gonna go in numerical order because that seems reasonable enough, starting with Norvina 1. Now, the first 3 Norvina palettes that were released all, at least to me, read as slightly different takes on a rainbow palette. With this one, you really focus in on the pinks and purples with a little bit of orange. There are blues in here, but they're just less prominent feeling, at least to me, than the pinks, the purples, and the oranges. The palette that I decided was close enough was the NYX Ultimate Festival palette. This is a relatively recent release from NYX. It has these really bold yellows and oranges and reds, as well as the pink and purple that we see in the Norvina palette. It is missing these pops of primary blue. However, again, I think it is close enough for at $18 regular price, and then being NYX, so you can almost always find at least 25% off somewhere. I think that this would be a really good option for someone who was interested in the kind of looks that you would likely get from the ABH Norvina Volume 1. Norvina Volume 2, like with Volume 1, is more or less a rainbow palette, but this one really brings to the forefront the yellows, greens, and blues. And the palette that I have decided to pair with this is the BH Cosmetics Trendy in Tokyo palette. Now, this is a lot more of a traditional rainbow palette, I think, in that the split between colors is a little bit more even than it is in any of the Norvina palettes. However, I think that the tones of yellow and green in particular that BH Cosmetics has included are really close to the ones that ABH has included in the Norvina Volume 2. We have these really bright spring-like greens. The yellow is bold but not highlighter yellow. And additionally, we have these pinks and oranges that are also pretty similar to those little pops that we see sprinkled throughout the Norvina palettes. This palette is missing some of the neutrals that the ABH palette has. It doesn't have the gray, the near black, or the dark brown that we see in the Norvina palette. However, I suspect that those would be pretty easy shades for most people who would be watching this video to dupe within their existing collection. While I could be wrong, I don't think that the gray, the brown, and the black are the shades that are really drawing most people to this palette. I think that if there was a look that you wanted to create using ABH Norvina Volume 2, you could probably do something pretty similar with this BH Cosmetics palette. To me, Norvina Volume 2 and Norvina Volume 3 look a little bit too close. I feel like Norvina Volume 3 has pretty similar colors to Volume 2, except they've amped up the number of neutrals quite a bit. Personally, I think that that makes the Norvina Volume 3 a little bit more wearable and a little bit more user-friendly. However, I can totally see why someone who was interested in the Norvina line might not be super thrilled about getting a half neutral palette, especially when at first sight this looks so bright and colorful. But in keeping with the half colorful, half neutral scheme of this palette, I've actually selected 2 different palettes that would together dupe it pretty well. They're both from Makeup Revolution. Sorry, they're both from I Heart Revolution, which is totally different, I'm sure. And they are both from the Heartbreaker line. I'm going to put both up at the same time. They are Flourish, which is the more green one, and Fiery, which is the more pink-orange one. There are a couple of neutrals in each of these palettes, and they mirror pretty closely some of the neutrals that you'll find in the Norvina palette. And I think that the pops of color, if you can call it pops, and I think that the colors that the palettes are centered around, this sort of pistachio green and these really vibrant pink-orange, just shy of being neon, I think that those are really pretty similar to those colors that really pop out when you first see the Norvina Volume 3 that make you think that this is actually a colorful palette or a complete rainbow palette even, when really it's half neutral and half colorful. There's just no way around that. These ABH palettes, these Norvina palettes get progressively more neutral as we go on. And the next one we're going to talk about, which is Volume 4, is again about half neutral, maybe a little bit over half in this case. And the neutrals tend to be pretty middle of the road. They are neither super warm nor super cool. And the more colorful shades tend to be sort of a bright pinky purple. And like with Volume 3, I'm going to be using 2 palettes to dupe Volume 4. The first, we're going to take care of the neutrals with the e.l.f. Nude Rose Gold. It's one of the 10-pan palettes that e.l.f. has had out for quite a few years at this point. I think that this one was actually quite popular when it was first released. It was sort of at the height of the rose gold craze that the world seemed to collectively go through in the mid-2010s. So it may well be sitting in a lot of your drawers already, but I think that the tones in this are quite similar to the ones that we see in the Norvina Volume 4. They are actually a little bit on the cool side, which is pretty similar to Norvina Volume 4, but these are not super gray-based cool tone neutrals at all. They have a little bit more rose to them, as is fitting for a rose gold palette. To hit the brighter notes in the ABH palette, I've pulled in a palette from JCat Beauty. Now, I know nothing about the quality of these JCat palettes. I've heard nothing about them before, but I was looking at the Once Upon a Time palette. This is a 15-pan palette. It's quite inexpensive. I don't have the price right in front of me, but I believe that it was right around maybe even less than $10. As soon as I saw this palette on Ulta's website, it made me think of this ABH palette. The really bright pinky based purples are so prominent in this palette, and I actually think you get a little bit of a better range of those kind of shades in this JCat Beauty palette than you do in the Norvina palette. Now finally we get to the Norvina palette that pulls at my heartstrings the most. This is Norvina Volume 5. This is, again, a little more than half neutral and half colorful, and the neutrals are very cool toned, and the colors, or the more colorful shades, I guess I should say, tend towards this blue-based purple, which I adore. And it makes a lot of sense then that the 2 palettes that I have chosen to use to dupe Volume 5 are also things that have been sitting on my wish list, and I have been avoiding the siren's call of for months at this point. The one that we're going to use to dupe those cool toned purples with a little bit of blue in them is the Juvia's Place The Violets palette. I think that this is so, so pretty. Norvina Volume 5 and the Juvia's Place The Violets take pretty similar approaches to the depth of the shades, as well as which shades are mattes versus which are shimmers. And really, when I sat down and actually counted out how many purple shades there were in the ABH Norvina palette, I was really only getting to about 7 or 8. So they don't even offer a much larger variety of purples in the Norvina palette than the Juvia's Place palette does, even though the Juvia's Place palette's a mini. And to add in those cool toned neutrals as well as a little bit of blue, because in the Norvina Volume 5 you do have some shades that are a little bit more blue than purple. I decided to add in the BH Cosmetics Blueberry Muffin palette. Let's just get it out of the way first. I think this palette is stunning, and I think there is a very good chance that I will eventually own it. But it is also very similar to some of the tones that you'll find in the Norvina Volume 5. Now, true, this does go a little bit more into true blue than Norvina does. However, Norvina does contain a couple of shades that are really more blue than purple, and it also has these really gray-based neutrals that we definitely see reflected in the BH Cosmetics palettes. Neither the Juvia's Place The Violets palette nor the BH Cosmetics Blueberry Muffin palette is a great replacement for Norvina Volume 5. Together, again, I think they could give you pretty similar looks to those that you could achieve with the Norvina palette, and really, even together, they're only about half the price of the Norvina palette, and you can get pretty good sales on both BH Cosmetics and Juvia's Place, so there's really no reason to be paying full price for either palette. Now, of course, these are not the only palettes in existence that could dupe the Norvina palette. I'm sure that many other brands have put out similar color combinations, and you can of course mix and match things that you already have in your own collection to get really similar looks. I just don't want anyone to think that they necessarily need an expensive palette, be it a $60 Norvina palette like we've looked at in this episode, or a $129 Natasha Denona palette like we did in the last episode of this, to get the kinds of looks that they might see on Instagram using those more expensive items. And I think that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this series and have a suggestion for another brand or another type of palette that I should cover in the next one, I would love to hear that. Thanks again for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed, and I really hope that I will see you in the next one. Bye!